So we've got a mayor's race underway in St. Louis, and our next story is not about the current candidates, but about a St. Louis mayor who truly left his mark on the city, and a lot more than just a street sign that says Tucker Boulevard. Jim Kircher sat down with the author of a new biography of the man he calls St. Louis's mid-century modern mayor.
And joining me is Southern Illinois University professor Andrew Theising, who has just written a biography entitled Mid-Mod Mayor, How Raymond Tucker Shaped St. Louis. Andy, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Mayor Tucker serves 3 terms, 53 to 65. This is an incredibly interesting period. But let me go to the question. How do you think he shaped St. Louis?
I think Tucker shaped St. Louis in ways that we can see and ways that we can't. I mean, this is the guy who built the skyline of St. Louis, basically. I mean, he wasn't mayor by the time some of this stuff was completed, but he laid the groundwork for the St. Louis skyline. So the city looks different physically. And then, you know, he did so much behind the scenes. Probably the greatest thing he did was to make permanent the earnings tax.
Raymond Tucker had been a Washington University engineering professor when he got involved in City Hall in the 1930s, helping push through changes to alleviate the city's serious smoke pollution.
You know, here's Tucker, you know, he's kind of the nerdy professor, and he gets pulled into public service. He has a liking for public service.
And Theising says his approach to problem solving continued to focus more on process than on politics. When he became mayor, the Gateway Arch project was stuck. The riverfront was cleared, Sarnen's design had been chosen, but the plan had always been to remove the railroad tracks on the riverfront, and the Terminal Railroad consistently refused. The project was deadlocked.
And Tucker, to his credit, convenes everybody. And, you know, here's the professor and his, you know, he's got a process, he's got a method, and he's going to bring these institutions together in his office. And at the end of the day, they decide to build around the tracks and just kind of cover them up.
And the trains are still running down there.
And the trains are still running. And so here's Mayor Tucker. He is actually able to do the groundbreaking and push this project. And that was a long time coming.
But you then also, so much of the attention of the 1950s in St. Louis has been on the negative. It's been on urban renewal in Mill Creek Valley. It's been on Pruitt-Igoe. So there's all of this stuff that is being done, but some of that stuff today we think was being done wrong.
Clearly, there were problems in the way that everything was done in the 1950s. There was a lot of racial injustice. There was a lot of social injustice. And at the same time, I think we have to be very careful to avoid taking our 21st century lens and all that we know now and using it to understand what was happening in the moment. It isn't like this just happened in a vacuum. It started in the neighborhoods, and then there were bond issues. I mean, what started in 1954 with convening the advisory committee, they didn't tear a building down till 1959. It was 5 years of community work.
It seems to me that this is the pivot point for St. Louis, still thinking big, but facing decline. I can't remember, it was maybe 1950 when the Post-Dispatch came up with the Progress or Decay series.
Yeah. And I really think that's how Mayor Tucker saw the city. If we didn't make progress on all fronts at the same time, we were going to fall behind. And I think a point that Tucker makes is this is a time of massive federal investment in cities around the country.
Yeah, and we're doing the biggest stuff, the biggest urban renewal, the biggest public housing project.
And Mayor Tucker says, you know, if we don't take what's earmarked for St. Louis, it's going to go to Texas, or it's going to go to some city that is ready to take it. It was part of this attitude. It was this, we have to build things new.
This was also an era of changing race relations, the 1954 Supreme Court decision ending legalized segregation, and increasingly strident demands to be served in lunch counters, restaurants, at hotels, and the demand for more jobs. The Jefferson Bank demonstration came in Tucker's final term. So one of the things you wrote towards the end of the civil rights chapter here, his consistent perspective of civil rights was ahead of his peers in the 1950s, but behind the times in the 1960s.
The stuff he was saying and doing in the late 40s and early 50s around civil rights was groundbreaking. He was calling for public accommodation. That is, if you're going to open your doors to the public, you open it to all of the public. And he's calling for public accommodation before there's a Brown versus Board of Education decision, before anybody's ever heard of Martin Luther King. And so he is so far ahead there. But then all of a sudden, somewhere, his consistent approach that the work kind of passed him by. And here we are in the mid to late 1960s, and he's very process driven, and he wants the process to work when the process really needed a shove. And there's where we see the biggest gap. Tucker was way ahead in 1950, and Tucker is fallen behind by 1965.
Tucker lost a bid for a fourth term, beaten in 1965 by A.J. Cervantes, a colorful figure, more of a politician, and with greater support in the black wards.
And was St. Louis ready for a change? I think really what happened, I don't know that the voters rejected Mayor Tucker as his big electoral base moved out of the city and moved to the county.
Okay, Professor, how are you going to grade Raymond Tucker?
Well, I think it's important, again, that we don't take our 21st century lens to judge these actions from the 1950s. We can't expect them to understand ideas that didn't come along until decades later. And so I give Mayor Tucker an A, because Mayor Tucker, he secured resources for St. Louis that we otherwise wouldn't have had. He broke a lot of log jams, and he entertained big ideas.
Well, Andy Theising, thanks for joining us, professor at SIUE. Another one of your books, Mid-Mod Mayor, How Raymond Tucker Shaped St. Louis. Interesting if you're interested in St. Louis history, St. Louis politics. And Andy, thanks for joining us. Thanks for writing the book. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.